Welcome all. So, I just broached on Bhagavad Gita in my last video, right? But we need to understand, the concatenation of events that led up to the conversation, wherein, Lord Krishna kind of, sparkled with his wisdom to Arjun. So, what was the background of it? How did it all begin? That epic conversation. So here is the story. Once upon a time, many thousands of years ago, the king of the Bharats ruled the land that we now know as India. And of course, his capital was Hastinapur. It is like, east of today's Delhi. That's the main capital of India. Now, this king had two sons. Now, the older one, Dhritarashtra, he was blind, which of course automatically disqualified him from kingship. And the younger one, who was very pale and, sickly kind of a character, his name was Pandu. But he of course, got his lucky break because he wasn't blind and become king. However, Pandu's happiness was short-lived. A venerable sage whom he had unintentionally annoyed laid on him a terrible curse. And that was that he should never be able to have children. Now just think about it. A king who cannot produce an heir is a completely, pointless king. So, what did Pandu do? He gave up the throne and went off to the forest with his two wives, Kunti and Madri. Blind Dhritarashtra became the caretaker king, ruling the kingdom in his brother's absence. Overall, Dhritarashtra was well pleased with the way things had gone for him. As he saw it, he wasn't so much taking care of the kingdom for his brother as he was keeping it safe for the sons he was going to have. If things went to plan, that childless brother of his would pass on one day soon, and then no force on earth would be able to stop his sons from rightfully claiming the throne of Hastinapur for themselves. Now in mythology, as you could say, however, as in life, things have a way of not going to plan. Pandu would never be able to have children. But in a brilliant mythological loophole, his elder wife Kunti could. How come? Well, Kunti had been taught a mantra by a venerable sage. You know what? That venerable sage is not the same one, who had cursed her husband. Because in those times, there were hundreds of venerable sages wandering around the forests of India. So, if she chanted the mantra with great devotion while focusing on any god of her choice, that god would come down to earth and give her a son. Yeah, that's simple. So, in the forest, Kunti chanted the mantra 3 times. First to Dharma, that is your Akayama, god of death and righteousness. Then, a couple of years later, to Pavan, Akavayu, the god of the wind, and then to Indra, lord of the heavens and master of the thunderbolt, and soon had 3 bonny boys to mother. She named them respectively Yudhishthir, Bhim, and Arjun. Now it was natural that Kunti's co-wife Madri should get a little envious and a little despondent at the sight of Kunti's gambolling boys. And she did. Kunti, fully satisfied with the size of her brood, decided to be generous and taught Madri the mantra too. That means she gave that mantra to Madri also. And then Madri chanted the mantra to the Ashwini twins, that is the god of medicine, and got herself at one shot two lovely twin boys whom she named Nakul and Sahadev. So together, the 5 sons of Pandu were called the Pandavas. Now, too much happiness upsets the balance of the world. So tragedy, which was waiting in the wings, decided to play spoil sport. One beautiful spring day, when the birds chirped and butterflies fluttered and bees buzzed and flowers entered the air, Pandu died. Broken-hearted Madri flung herself on his funeral pyre, leaving Kunti to handle all the 5 boys single-handedly. It was all a bit too much for Kunti. So, she decided to head back to Hastinapur and throw herself and her sons at King Dhritarashtra's mercy. Now, much had happened in Hastinapur since Pandu and his wives had left. Dhritarashtra had married a princess called Gandhari, and the two of them had hold your breath, 100 sons and one beautiful daughter. Now you might be wondering, how did they manage to get 100 sons? It is not because that, Pandu was gone for so long that they continued to produce. So now these 100 boys and their sister were all born almost at the same time, from 101 embryos that had been incubated in mud pots for several months until the babies were all grown and ready. You see, these kind of stuff, it happened all the time in ancient India. The 100 boys were known as the Kauravas, or you could call them Kauravas. And of course, their, Kuru being their ancestor and one of the greatest kings of the land. Now, when his sister-in-law unexpectedly showed up at his doorstep years after she had left, and with 5 kids to boot, Dhritarashtra was more than a little dismayed. But he couldn't possibly turn away his dead brother's family and what was another 5 brats in a household that already had 101. Or at least that's what the king told himself as he took them in. In the years to come, he would wonder over and over at the wisdom of that decision. Now the 105 princes grew up together, learning the same lessons under the same teachers. Dhritarashtra was very fair that way. The trouble was the 5 Pandavas constantly, or you could say consistently, beat the heck out of their 100 cousins in every department. Beat, not literally beat, but they would actually overshadow them. They were so good. So among the 105 princes, Yudhishthir was the most honest and upright. Bhim was the strongest. Arjuna outclassed everyone else at archery, and Nakul and Sahadev were the best horsemen on the field. Plus, all the Pandavas were just really nice young men, polite, gentle, to whomsoever they would meet, respectful of their elders, concerned about the people of their kingdom, and so on. So, they were also loved by everyone, obviously. And predictably, the Kauravas, particularly the oldest, Duryodhan, a nasty piece of work, who wanted to be the next king, hated their cousin's guts. Now the story goes on and on. Years roll by. Duryodhan, nervous that the elders would name Yudhishthir the next king, decided to do away with his 5 cousins. He pretended to have a change of heart and build them a brand new palace in a distant town when he invited them to stay the night. Very few people knew that the palace was built of highly inflammable lac and was going to be set on fire that night. Luckily, Yudhishthir was one of those very few people. When the dastardly deed was carried out, the Pandavas had already escaped through a secret tunnel that led to the forest. Once there, they decided to stay put for a bit and let Duryodhan believe they were dead. One day, they heard of an archery competition that the king of Panchala was hosting. The winner would get to marry the kingdom's princess, a beauty called Draupadi. The Pandavas decided to try their luck. Every other prince had tried and failed when Arjun, who was in disguise, walked over and easily hit the target, a spinning wooden bird on top of a tall post. Knowing that no one else in the kingdom had such an unerring aim, Duryodhana realized who the archer really was and was enraged that his plan had failed. An aside here, it was at this archery contest that the Pandavas first met their cousin Krishna, the son of their mother's brother. They quickly became close friends. Meanwhile, the Pandavas returned joyfully to the forest, with Draupadi in tow, eager to share their happy news with their mum. "Mother," they cried, "look what we have brought home today." Now Kunti was busy saying her prayers. Without turning around, without seeing, she responded in typical mumbly fashion with, "Whatever it is, my sweethearts, make sure you divide it equally among yourselves." Ouch! Now that mom had spoken, there was no going back. Draupadi became the wife of all five Pandavas, and there was nothing she or anyone else could do about it. With everyone figuring out that the Pandavas were alive and well, there was intense pressure on Dhritarashtra to do the fair thing and give them half the kingdom. The king knew it was right and good that he should do so, but he got a little protective about his own eldest son and gave the Pandavas the worst, most barren part of the kingdom to rule. If there was one thing the Pandavas were not afraid of, it was hard work. They cleared the forest around their part of the kingdom, made the land fertile by digging irrigation channels, and built themselves a fabulous, glittering new capital called Indraprastha, which they ruled wisely and well. Now, of course, that made Duryodhan even more jealous and even more determined to destroy his cousins. With his sneaky Uncle Shakuni, he plotted to exploit Yudhishthir's one weakness, which was his love for a good game of dice, to bring about his downfall. Now, for your information, this game of dice does not involve much skill or strategy. It is just a game of pure chance. There is no guaranteed way to win except by cheating. And of course, Uncle Shakuni, who was beside Duryodhan, he was the grand master of the cheats. So, when Duryodhana invited Yudhishthir to a friendly game of dice, Yudhishthir could not resist the challenge. Through the course of the game, Yudhishthir kept losing but did not stop playing, convinced that luck would turn his way soon. But he kept losing everything. Palaces, territories, their entire kingdoms. In each round, the Pandavas, lost something or the other. And in the end, it was nothing they could lose. Yudhishthir staked each of his 4 brothers as slaves, then their common wife, and finally himself, and lost them all. Now King Dhritarashtra has had enough. He knew that his sons had won by cheating, and he decided it was time to step in. He insisted that the Pandavas be given their freedom and their kingdom back. Duryodhan was furious but could not disobey the king, and the Pandavas returned to Indraprastha, red-faced but free. Now, a few months later, Duryodhan was back in action, working on his dad to get him to invite the Pandavas back to another game of dice. This time, there would be just one game and just one thing at stake. Whoever lost would have to go into exile in the forest for 13 years, with the added condition that they spend the 13th year in hiding. If they were found out during that year, they would go right back into exile for another 13 years. In the end, Dhritarashtra succumbed and sent out the invitation. Once again, Yudhishthira accepted. Once again, he played the game, and once again, he lost. The Pandavas, their wife, and their mother Kunti returned once again to the forest. 13 years later, after spending the last year in hiding successfully, they came back to claim their kingdom. But Duryodhan flatly refused. Noble Yudhishthira retracted his right to the kingdom and instead asked for just 5 villages, one for each of the brothers. Duryodhan retorted that he would not even give them the amount of land that would fit on the tip of a needle. There was only one honorable thing left for Yudhishthira to do, and he did it. He decided that, he ought to declare war against mighty Hastinapur. And preparations on both sides began in full swing. To the elders in the family, it was clear that terrible destruction and devastations were at hand. Worried, they asked Krishna to do something. Why Krishna? For one, he was a relative, not an outsider, and this was, after all, a family feud. Second, his word had great influence with the Pandavas. Third, he was of the same generation as the 2 sets of warring cousins, so he could talk to them more as a friend than as an elder, which meant he would be taken more seriously. Fourth, he was considered impartial and respected by both the cousins and by the elders in the family. Fifth, he was himself a powerful king and therefore considered politically savvy. Krishna got both sides together and tried to hold peace talks. But Duryodhan was thirsting for war and refused to negotiate. The talks failed and war became inevitable. And thus, you could say, the stage was set for the great war at Kurukshetra for 18 long days. The greatest warriors in the land faced each other and fought like lions, their roars resounding across the land. One by one, legendary heroes fell, never to rise again, drenching the dusty plains with their noble blood. One by one, entire clans were wiped off the face of the earth, denuding the land of good men, leaving only widows and wailing orphans behind. But all that was still to come. Before that, before the first bow had twanged, sending the first arrow zinging through the charged air of Kurukshetra, before a single mace had been swung into an enemy's skull, crushing it, before the first sword, glinting in the sun, had sliced through soft flesh, before the 2 armies had rushed at each other, murder on their minds and rage in their maniac eyes, before all of this, right at the very start of the Great War, was the conversation. Yes, my dear listeners, this is what we are going to deal with, and this is where we are going to learn our lessons too. So this conversation between Krishna and Arjun is extremely important, and that constitutes the main thing of Bhagavad Gita. So more to come. Be hooked onto it. Keep listening and do subscribe and share. Thank you so much.